Okay, good morning. We're going to begin Sif Chav Ches. We're on page 3839. And we're just finishing off the seventh principle of Hachno'ah, of humility. And as we just were finishing yesterday, Rabbi Yonah was saying there's different components of how the arrogant person is hurt. Number one, he is naturally led to bad activities because of his attitude. He also, we just ended off yesterday saying he doesn't get any spiritual assistance from Hashem. Hashem's not going to help him with his struggle to rectify things. And this is in so many ways, as we'll be discussing over Sukkot. And the Chovas HaLevavos brings down a story of a rabbi going to a city, and there's other stories similar to that, where he would be a guest, and he was given the choice of where to stay among two different homes, two people. The first option was a person who was suspected of adultery, and the second one, a person who was known to be the most arrogant person in the entire city. Okay, I guess those are the richest people in the city that could have guests. So think about that. Which one would you stay by? And why? You have to have a reason. You have to have a reason. Those are the two options. Either you stay by the most arrogant person in the city, or the person suspected of adultery. You only can answer it if you have a biblical source. There's no way you're going to answer this story.
We went through this, we know the answer.
Yeah, well, yeah. So the answer, so he went to the guy who was suspected of adultery. Why? Because he said, regarding immorality, the Torah says that God resides within us even though we make mistakes of that nature. Ki anochi b'socham b'toch tumasam. I am amongst them in their impurity. If they're impure, if those kinds of areas, I can still live with them. While Chazal say that Hashem says, me and the Baal Gaiva, we can't live together. Hashem cannot stay with the arrogant person. So the rabbi says, I'm only judging the same way Hashem judges. But Chazal says, Hashem says, me and the Baal Gaiva, we can't live in the same place. Right? So the Baal Gaiva thinks he's God. The person who's immoral doesn't think he's God, he's just immoral. I mean, not just, but he's immoral. So if Hashem can live with the immoral fellow, Shekhinah can be there. Okay, he may have to get punished for it, but the Shekhinah is still there. But the guy who's arrogant, Hashem has nothing to do with it. So again, we see that one has to deal with one's arrogance, even in the post-Teshuva stages, in order to be able to get Hashem's divine assistance. You need a lot of divine assistance to not fall back into doing Averos. And in so many other ways. And if you don't have Hashem's help, you'll never win. So if you're the Baal Gaiva, Hashem's not helping you. So finish. So you're never going to be able to really get Teshuva done properly. Okay, continuing on inside now.
That means there's no solution for arrogant people? Is that the idea?
It's a major problem. It's living with a major liability. A major handicap. It's a major handicap. There's just too many problems here. It's as he said, it's the sowing of the earth to do Averos. Baal Gaiva, there's nothing that stops the Baal Gaiva. And similar to all these things, person doesn't feel shame. All these things, if you don't have it, it's a major. That's why it's 20 steps. You'll forever struggle. You're forever going to struggle. You're going to try, and then one day it'll work. The next day you say, well, I don't really have to do it. And you got to be able to curb that. Okay, Chav Ches. What about if a guy doesn't regret? He's not going to be able to do Teshuva. These are all important steps. Again, it's different levels of Teshuva. Different levels of Teshuva. You may stop doing this particular Avera. Okay, but then you might get into other Averas. Chav Ches. Vod Chai Bala Teshuva Likon L'Kayim Alav Lisnaig Al Derech Shomer V'Seir Shechon L'Bracha Ve'Vishval Ruach Bifnei Kol Odom. The Baal Teshuva is still in this aspect of humility. The Baal Teshuva is also obliged to be humble and fulfill and conduct himself as it says in Pirkei Avos. Hevishval ruach, you should have a lowly spirit in front of all people. Now, Rabbeinu Yonah is adding that the authentic value of humility isn't restricted to only being humble before Hashem. This quality of humbleness is one that the person has to exercise an image of himself which expresses itself vis-a-vis Hashem in one way and vis-a-vis everyone else as well. Up to now, it seems that the whole focus was you're humble before Hashem. Now he's adding this aspect, you have to be humble before other people. So what he's saying is it's impossible to work on and acquire humility if you're only humble in one aspect. Meaning, if I'm only humble in front of Hashem but not in front of people, or if I'm humble in front of people and not humble in front of Hashem. Humility is an attitude towards oneself and what one feels one is. And it defines itself in how he will relate to Hashem and to other people. If you're only humble in one aspect and not the other, then you're not really being humble, you're just putting on a show. You're just putting on a show. If you say, well, before Hashem I'm humble, but before others I'm not. No, a person who's arrogant, there's a reason why he feels he's arrogant. Right? And that's an inner thing. It doesn't work, well, before Hashem I'm humble and others I expect everything from people. Like, why do you think you're better than other people? Why do you think you're better than other people? It means you are totally disregarding the fact that everything you have comes from Hashem. Then you can't be humble before Hashem. You may say it, you may act it. You may act it. But it isn't true. It isn't true. And therefore he's saying it's something that's got to cut across all lines. That's critical. Yasig mizeh, and what will he gain from this? Shelo yichas v'lo yachbid im chaverov. That first of all, he won't get angry, and he won't be so particular when he's dealing with his friends. Why is it that we have trouble tolerating our friends' quirks and mishigasim? Very often it's not because of the nature of the mishigasim. Well, it could be. Sometimes a person does things that are someone does something so grotesque, it'll gross you out, you can't stand it. Okay, but more often than not, it's because we have a blown up vision of ourselves, which makes it difficult to tolerate other people's differences. A person does it one way, you do another way. You know, a person plays. You're in Shul and you don't like the chazan, right? It's usually not because it's so displeasing that I can't stand it. It could happen, but you think it should be a certain way, and the guy isn't doing it the way it should be done, and therefore it's difficult to get along with other people. The Vilna Gaon in his Sefer Even Shleima says, a person who has no gaiva has no anger. It goes hand in hand. Again, if you're arrogant towards others, you'll be angry towards them. Right? Even it's not good. And if you think you're humble before Hashem, it's not. What happens to a fellow who's so arrogant? So all the things he hears from others, al yitein libo, he doesn't take it to heart. He can't. Where's he going to learn to improve from other people's criticisms? The arrogant person never takes criticism from anyone. So he won't be able to improve in those areas as well. And similarly, what will he not be able to do? Lahavra al midosov, to be able to look away from his own feelings, being able to let things go. When other people do things to him, it's a very important midah, to be ma'avir al midosov, to pass by your own feelings and let it go. Usually we're so makbid, everyone was so particular, he didn't speak to me the right way, he didn't this, he didn't that. Even if they didn't, part of being a Jew is you let things go. And since they don't act that way, then he's not able to benefit from the fact that he can get forgiveness for his sins. As our rabbis say, famous rule, Hamaver al midosov, mavrin lo al kol pshav, mida keneged mida. A person who's able to let things go that are done to him, so Hashem is willing to let things go that you've done to him as well. which is really helpful. So it's measure for measure. So you don't let anything go. Everything you have to make an issue out of. I just wanted to call you to let you know how I felt about so and so and this and that. So, okay, so Hashem will call you to let you know also. It's such a big deal. You cut in front of me in traffic. I just had to call you to tell you this and that. Let it go. It's not such a big deal, right? So that you lose that benefit. And now that is such an important thing because that Pesach Tikva Nichbaro. That's such a wonderful opening of hope. If Hashem could forgo on what you've done. V'nemar, as the pasuk says, Yitein be'afar piv, a person, as it were, if a person would put dirt into his mouth, meaning to say, he's quiet towards the injustices that are done towards him, the pasuk says, Ulai yesh tikva, maybe there's hope for such a fellow, that Hashem will forgive him. Yitein l'makeu lechi, if he puts into his cheek, he lets somebody hit him, he lets the guy who hits him, this is where the expression turns the other cheek. It didn't come from him, it came from Yirmiyahu. Okay, if you turn your cheek, Yispa b'cherpa, he'll be satiated with shame, and Hashem will not have to punish him. So remember, that's important too. Okay, so that ends Hachno. So far, every one of these seems to have been having a partner. Well, how do we know you're real? Right? There always seems to be a physical, every one of these, always been its partner to know, how to know for sure that what you're doing is real. So Chavtes begins Ha'ikar Hashmini, the 8th principle, and then that will be Ha'achno b'maise, humility in deed. How do we have this? So he gives a number of examples. She isnaheg b'mane rach. First of all, he conducts himself with a soft way about him. And that is most obviously articulated in soft responses to people. Somebody starts yelling at you or whatever, respond softly. If you look at really great Rosh Hashivas, great Gedolim, they never yelled. That's it. They never yelled. They always spoke softly. That's it. They always spoke softly. No matter what. Kinyan Shnemers, it says in Proverbs, Man erach yoshiv chema. A soft response will turn away anger. If someone's angry at you, you want to settle things down, just you speak soft. Right? That's what a good person working in the complaint department should learn. First thing is just to talk softly. Well, the other person will his tone and tune and we'll all go down. It comes down to that common denominator. And so he says, "Bekol namuch," with a very soft way, right? Because if you respond in a noisy way, then it becomes a personality issue. Your personality is coming against the other guy's personality, and that only makes things worse. But if you talk softly, there's not such a projection of the personality, as it were, and you don't have the personalities clashing. And if you're talking softly, you have to listen to the words and hear what the other person is saying. And they're going to have to listen carefully to hear what you're saying. And the whole personality aspects, that usually is what most of the clashing becomes after a while, is totally eliminated. But what's the real point about this? That's why it works. That's why Man Erach Yoshiv Chema works that way. But what's Nogea to Teshuva is, this is the way of the humble people. The humble person does not speak so loudly. As the pasuk says, as Yeshaya says, "V'shafalt me'eretz tedaberi," and you were lowered. V'shafalt, you were lowered, that you should speak out of the ground, as it were. Ume'afor tishach imrasecha. And again, your speeches should be low, like the dust. So you're speaking in a soft fashion. The opposite, which is said about the wealthy, arrogant person. The wealthy man answers brazenly. It's not always true, but there's a very high correlation between a person's wealth and his brazenness. More often than not, if you have to pick who's the person who's going to call a teacher or rabbi at a very inconvenient time, it'll be the wealthy person. There's also nudniks that go across the lines. There are that as well. But all things being equal, who is going to do that more? Because they just expect to get results. They call up even even though they know that someone else has already been told the answer is no, so the rich person has to call and say, I really don't, and I know I'm not a member in your shul, but, and then they start this whole thing, and then they'll call up 50 people to nudge you to finally agree and acquiesce to what they want. That's just generally the way it is, because money is power. They think they have the power, so they think it's something that they can't have. It's just a question of exercising their influence. So that's the opposite. We don't want that. And first is to speak softly. Number two, you shouldn't be occupied. Very important, the term he's using, occupied with beautiful clothes and ornaments. You don't dress fancy. He didn't say you don't dress fancy. You're not occupied in being dressed fancy. What does that mean? A rabbi can't have a nice tie. A rabbi can have a nice tie. But, and I have a lot of nice ties. Why? Because somebody gives them to me. Believe me, I wouldn't go to the store for a minute to occupy myself with it. What was it before? I got these ties from Milton. My wife would come to me and say, here's a tie. Thank you. That's all. I think I ever once went to the store and picked out a tie. Never picked out a tie. Maybe if I was with my wife already buying a suit, so she'd say, what tie do you want? Yes, I say this one. But people, you can tell. Guys look at people looking for the designer labels. That's the person who's occupied. Who's occupied? What does that have to be a designer? Right? It's just so you can wear something nice. If you have examples where wealthy people say, listen, we don't want you to live in such poverty here. We bought you clothes, and it's not to your covet to wear tattered clothes. Okay, but to occupy oneself, and that's a big deal. And the jewelry and the ornaments. Not to say you can't have jewelry. Not to say you can't wear it, but you're occupied. You think, well, you got a wedding ring, so you wear it. That's not, you're not occupying yourself. The husband buys you a gift, you wear it. You're not occupying. But these, especially, I have to have. I don't even know what's around nowadays. I have to have this. The girls say I have to have this kind of ring. There's like a whole style. I never thought it was a style of ring. A ring's a ring. But I guess I'm very not into things. It's a certain kind of setting and a certain kind of this, a certain kind of that. And you hear that from people who are, getting engaged to coal guys. It doesn't make any sense. So if you're occupied with the kind of clothes you're wearing, that clearly is indicative of a person who's a Baal Gaiva. Kamosha Nemar. How do we know this? So you should remove them. It says after the Jew sinned with the golden calf, it says V'tohoreid et yecha me'alecha. Therefore take off your ornaments. You shouldn't be wearing ornaments. You have to act in a humbler way. That's why. That's why we're told nowadays nobody, certain days people shouldn't wear all their jewelry. Talking about Tisha B'Av and certain days, even on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, you get dressed, but now with all your jewelry. You're coming to Hashem Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's for humility. Shouldn't really be any jewelry. You have to wear a little L'Kavod Yontif. Okay, it is a Yontif, so I can't not honor the Yontif. Right, put something on. But to be bedecked, you have the pearls, and you have the brooch, and you have the ring, and you have the this, and you have the that, and the earrings, the lace, and everything is all in its glory. Okay, set up for a chasna or something, but otherwise, because again, it's all meant to attract attention, to think that one is something. So a kala should be dressed up. Like the Sephardim go nuts over this. Like the mamish, the kala is like a princess. You're dressing like a mamish, like a princess. As she is on that day, and she has to be made felt to be that she. Why? That you got these koichas, you got this ability. You have to realize you now are are getting married and you are great now. So okay, so they won't believe it. You know, who, me? I'm just a little girl. I was never anything special. We're talking about nice, modest Jewish Sephardi girls, right? I don't think I'm ever going to be important. What are you talking? You're going to be the Eshes Chayil. You're going to be the Ekeres Habayis. You're going to build generations. So you better darn well think you're important. So they dress. So there's a place to do that. When he's a chassan, when they're a kala, you have to make them feel more special than they are, so they can believe that they are. But that's it. Like that's it. You only have your wedding day once. It's downhill after that in terms of ornaments and things like that. You never. You know, go look at your wedding pictures. Ugh. That's what I used to look like. Right? Whatever. You look, it's like, you know, people had to look like movie stars. Whatever. But normally you got to keep it down. V'nemer ba'achav, it says by Yaakov, who was one of the worst people, but he had some moments of tshuva. Vayotzov, vayishkav, vasok, vayihalech at. He fasted. He laid down in a sack. He walked softly and slowly. And what did Hashem say about that? Hashem you see Yaakov has humbled himself before me. So that's what it is. He's fasting. He's lying down in the sack bed. And vayihalech ot. Vayihalech ot. What does it mean? Vayihalech ot. Behefach mederech hamlachim. It's the opposite of what kings usually do. Shemahalchim barov chayil v'kol hamulah. That they go with the whole entourage and the whole honor guard and all these things. Achav went soft. He went like, you know, without the big deal. So that's another aspect. Tamid einav shachus. Another aspect is your eyes are always lowered. You don't have your nose up in the air. You're looking down. Shenemers, it says in Eov, v'shach einayim yoshia. A person who has lowered eyes will be saved from Hashem. So it comes out. This is an easy one here, at least in terms of understanding the concept. So simone hachna, what are the signs of a person who is really humble? Kamo, for example, manerach, speak softly, v'kol hanamuch, and a low voice. It's two things. Speaking softly and a low voice. You can, you know, when he says softly, it's not the volume here. It's the rhetoric. It's the comments. That's what he means. You know, people can talk very softly and destroy people. Very softly, just very soft. As a niggin killing me softly, right? You could say very quietly, you know, what you think about another person, which will be a very strong rhetoric. So the rhetoric is soft, the voice is soft. V'shachus ha'ayin, and the eyes are lowered. All that is why. Yaskiru lachnia alibo. It will remind him to be humble in his heart. So what he's saying over here is that all these things, these behaviors, they have a value not in and of themselves, but because these behaviors always remind the person at the humbleness that is inherent in his heart and should remind him to be humble. So in the beginning, you may have to fake it. In the beginnings, there's two aspects. Number one, the outer activities affect the inner feelings. So the more you do it, hopefully it'll bring you to that state. And also, even if you're trying to be humble, and you really feel a certain humility after sinning, this will remind you that you have to be humble as well. So that's how it has to be indeed, so that it's not just you think you're humble, you have to exactly activate. Okay, that was easy and short. Moving on now. Lamed. Ha'ikar hatshi. This one's a bit longer. The ninth principle is shviras hatava hagashmis, which means breaking the materialistic lust that is within a person. Okay. So, what that means, so Rabbeinu is not talking about breaking one's behavior in a physical activity which is not correct. Because we're already done tshuva. We're already past the ziva sachet. You've stopped doing sins. We're not talking about breaking your physical desires in terms of sins. the person's already done tshuva on those sins. So he's not doing physical things that are wrong. Rabbi Yonah is talking about breaking the materialistic aspect of the activities that you do, and he will explain. Yoshiva libo, he should take it to his heart. Ki'ataiva, because a person's desires. It can make it possible for the person to sin and to pull sins to the person with, as he's using a term, the ropes of falseness. So what does he mean to say? He says, when a person is very involved in his life with physical activities and the satisfaction of a physical activity, a person likes the finer things in life. You like to have a very well-prepared steak. You like to have Haagen-Dazs ice cream. You have to have the fanciest coffees. I'm not saying you have coffee, but it has to be premier coffee. You're a connoisseur of all the physical pleasures of the world, right? So, and we're not saying it's an avera. It's not an avera to eat a very well-prepared, expensive steak. It's not an avera per se. But invariably, if a person is in that kind of world, so that makes the person more physically focused, more materialistically orientated in terms of his behavior. So, in other words, the way that a person gravitates in his general behavior will then define itself in his being able to control himself in activities which are either proper or not proper activities. A person that controls his eating habits, for example, the chances are that person will have a much greater control in activities that are related to physical pleasure, and especially when it's going to come time to possibly, brushing with certain averos that are of a physical nature. The fact that you can control yourself in a physical area will help you in others. There is a spillover effect. There is a spillover effect. On a simple level, we'll see what he's going to. If a person is particular not to eat food, rather to eat food that is only Chalav Yisrael, we're not saying you have to, but if a person is particular about that, it's not likely he's going to eat treif meat, because he's given up all the kosher chocolate in the world. That's not Chalav Yisrael. He's given up his Reese's peanut butter cups, which doesn't get better than that if you're a kid, right? Right? You're giving up a lot of good, nice kosher chocolates, right? So you're having a Chalav Yisrael chocolate. So you're paying more for it also, right? I mean, as good as Chalav Yisrael is, still doesn't, from what I'm told, doesn't compare to the really good stuff. I don't think it's a Chalav Yisrael ice cream that can stand up to Ben & Jerry's, Haagen-Dazs and stuff like that. That's what I'm told, right? So you're already cutting back on the things you can enjoy in life, right? So now you're going to go have a ham sandwich, right? Now you're going to eat something with a questionable hechsher. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but you've already curbed how much pleasure you're going to have from things, right? Now, and if you don't curb it, you're always going to the extreme. You have to have all kinds of physical pleasures. Well, now you've moved the line over. You've moved the line over. You're getting dangerously close to, well, if I could have this kosher pleasure and this kosher pleasure and this kosher pleasure and every single kosher pleasure, where do you draw the line to a kosher pleasure and a not kosher pleasure? In other words, within the realm of kosher pleasures, you have to be keeping things away from you. Right? You've got to say, this I can have, and there's got to be something I can't have. And the more of the somethings you can't have in this world, although it's not an affair if I have that something, but I'm not training myself in curbing myself to stop myself when I'll need to stop myself. And that's the Piz Rebbe spoke a lot about that in the B'nai Machshava Tova, if you remember. And the Bovavi spoke about it. But that whole idea, well, I believe in the B'nai Machshava Tova he spoke more about the eating on we talk about for Pesach and things like that, right? You have to train yourself that you could have more, but I'm not having more. That's combat. It's preparing yourself to have combat with the Yetzer. Right? That was, Shelley's not here. Chicken instead of beef. Remember? Chicken instead of beef. It's not a favor to have beef, but you have to learn. I'd rather have the beef, but I'm going with the chicken. Why? Just to show that I can control myself. Now, that's not so amazing at that point, but there'll be a time you have to control yourself between what's kosher to do or eat and what's not kosher to do and eat. And you haven't had any practice of holding yourself back. That's why one of the greatest disservices that is happening to this generation and last generation is parents didn't hold back anything from their kids. This expression, I want to afford my child the best that life has to offer, is a very non-Jewish concept. The way people apply it. The way people apply that idea. I mean, we should want the best spiritually for our children. The best schools, the best rebbes, the best shul to go to. The things that are spiritually the best, we should want the best for our kids. But that's not what this generation's been talking about. I want my kid to have everything. You know, and if my kid cries, I have to make sure it's all fixed up that he has what he wants. So I could train him to have everything he wants. You have to train them to not have everything they want. And even if you can give it to them, to bedafka not give it to them. Why? So you should get used to the fact you don't have everything you want in life. So if we've raised up a generation of people who have everything they want in life, so where's it going to stop? And that's why they're soft, and they can't make any sacrifices in life to stop getting things that way. So that's what he's leading up to over here when he's talking about that. You know, he shouldn't be drawn even to things that are kosher things. Now, there is one caveat to this. This being able to hold yourself back from physical pleasures will help you from averos that are made strong to you in a physical way. But there's other types of pleasures that aren't physical that can still draw you to an averos. It's not going to stop you from all averos. In other words, there's certain averos come out of taiva, pure lust. Like, I can't control myself, I have to have this. That's lust. But there's other averos that come from the need for kavod and gaiva, honor and arrogance. So that, you know, you can have a person who doesn't eat a lot, but demands a lot of kavod. That's not in contradiction. Because kavod is a different aspect of pleasure. It's not the aspect of having an extra piece of kobol. Right? You can have people who are very health conscious and they're very refrained from a lot of physical pleasures. When it comes to kavod, they're up there. When it comes to being a Baal Gaiva, they're up there. So we got to work on other things to take care of kavod and Gaiva. But on the other hand, there's a lot of averos that come from good old-fashioned physical pleasure, and probably most. Why can't the person get up early in the morning? He's used to not getting up. It's hard. It's physically painful, and I want to do things that my body likes doing. That's why. But don't come to shul early in the morning, right? Why do people? The whole idea of having so many things means you got to work more, and your whole life changes because you work more. So so many averos are going to come because of all that. So it's a major thing, but it's not going to solve everything, but it's going to help a lot. So let's continue. V'yisnaheg, 3 lines from the bottom. V'yisnaheg b'darkei ha-prishus. He should conduct his life in a way of prishus, which is separation. Right? V'lo yochel rak l'sov v'nafsho. He only eats to satiate his soul, v'kiyum gufo, and to keep his body going. This would be the best level of doing this at this level. Is that I only eat what I need to eat. What I need to be healthy. You call a doctor and say, doctor, give me the exact menu that I should be eating. What's the healthiest way I should be eating? And that's all I'm going to eat. And whatever, to make my body operate, and l'sov v'nafsho, that it will satiate my soul, as we've explained many Thu B'Shvat get-togethers, where you're really trying to extricate the nitzotzos shel kedusha, the sparks of holiness, out of the fruits, which is the taste, if you recall we said. In other words, I'm trying to I'm trying to eat the food for the recognition of how much Hashem loves me. So and you don't have to have such an orange will do the trick. An orange will do the trick. Eat an orange, and you can think about how much Hashem loves you. The orange tastes good. I wouldn't label orange as going overboard in physical pleasures. Right? Have an orange, and you sit down and make a bracha, and you enjoy how it tastes, the tangy taste or the sweet taste, and how the orange explodes in your mouth, and it's such a great feeling to your. And you say, "Wow, Hashem, you made that special for me, and you packaged it so nicely, without needing a bag and all those things." And you come to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's l'sov nafsho. That's what you should be eating for, right? And what your body needs. Kin Yishnemer, as the pasuk says, "Tzadik ochel l'sov nafsho." The tzaddik eats to sustain his soul, but the rest of the pasuk says, he didn't bring it down yet. The rest of the pasuk says, "Ubeten rishoyim tichsar." The belly of the wicked is always lacking. They're always hungry. Right? Like you go to these Pesach hotels. This is the exact opposite. If you're going there, if you're paying to go there, not if you're staff. Right? If you're paying to go there, generally speaking, you're paying to gluttonize. I'd say, 90%. Okay, some are paying, they just can't make Pesach. Okay, so you can't make Pesach. Okay, you can't make Pesach. There are people who can't make Pesach, older people. You don't have anybody. You have a whole slew of that also. They just don't have any family, and it's a Nebuch, and they're going to be Pesach alone. So they want to have Pesach with a rabbi and this and that. Okay, so, but there's a certain percentage who it's to gluttonize. You see, it's like a mama's never. You see people who are so immensely overweight walking away from the Viennese table with 40 pastries. It's like you say, so don't you have any self-respect? You say to yourself, there's a reason why you look that way, and you're probably going to die from a heart attack in another 10 years. And they just can't stop themselves. So it's not a ver per se, but it's not going to help you to control yourself from doing other affairs, right? And that's by eating, but it's not just eating. He's talking about a whole realm now. This one's going to be a little more difficult for us to handle. Val yigash el isha rakokai misses period verivia or the mitzvahs oina. And a person should not approach his wife except to fulfill the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying, and also for the mitzvah of spending time with his wife. That's why that should be the mindset. Because as long as a person goes after physical gratification, nimshach achar toldos hachomer, he's going after those things that are the ramifications that come out of being engaged in a physical type of lifestyle, very material and gross in nature. So again, even when I talk about intimacy, the focus isn't, well, I need to have a lot of pleasure, and that's why I am being with my spouse, so I can have a lot of pleasure. Okay, again, this is a higher level. We're not saying if you do it for pleasure, it's an avera. It's not an avera, and this is something that for some might even be harder than food. But you got to realize, and there are, and there are levels. When they talk, this firm write about levels of machshava you should have when you're involved. Okay, so the lowest levels that you can even think is, well, at least I'm doing it in a permitted way, and I'm not doing it in a prohibited way. At least having that machshava that I feel I have to have this pleasure, and if I don't get it here, I'll get it from other places. So at least you're getting it from the right place. Okay, that's not what we call the highest kavanah, but it's better than being immoral. But again, so it's all part of that desire of physical gratification. And so the more you're into that, the more you're looking into that physical zone, and the more the yirchak miderech hanefesh hamaskeles, you're distancing yourself from the nefesh hamaskeles, from the soul that's able to use its seichel and to think. Chovos HaLevavos talks a lot about this. Again, it's always back to the question of what do you identify with yourself more as? Do you identify yourself more as a body or as a neshama? What do you think is your main being and what you really work for and strive for in life? So the more you're engaged in physical things, the more that just supports the concept that you're identifying with the body. And that becomes that realm of what things are important to you and where you gravitate and all those kinds of things. And but what about spiritual things and intellectual things? You're just not into that zone. So, and it can't be, people make a mistake and think, well, I can be very physical, and then when it's time to be spiritual, I'll be very spiritual. It doesn't work that way. It cannot work that way. It just can't be that way. If whoever says, well, I'm gonna eat the best steaks and have the best designer labels, and I'm having intimacy just for my pleasure, nothing else. And then when I come in front of a Gemara, but when I'm in front of a Gemara, I'm totally immersed in the Gemara. And I'm totally into what Rashi has to say is pshat in the Gemara. You know, it says, well, when I'm physical, I'll act physical, and when I'm intellectual, I'll act intellectual. You know, that's how you define most of the modern university professors. I mean, in my personal life, I'm a behemoth. But in my philosophy can be amazing, right? So you know, that might be true when you talk about secular knowledge. You might be able to be a big genius in secular knowledge, even if you live like a behemoth. But in terms of Chachmas HaTorah, when you talk about wisdom of Torah, those two things cannot go together. The nature of the wisdom of Torah defines itself. And the degree that a person can perceive and understand it is the degree that the person is spiritually orientated to understanding it. If a person leads a life that's very physical in nature, and then you pop a spiritual concept in front of the person, he thinks you're off the wall. Why? Because the whole gravitation to the person is physical, and because of that, he can understand that 1 + 1 is 2. He can understand a difficult scientific equation, but he has no way of appreciating finer spiritual points because he's not gravitating along those wavelengths of finer spiritual points. So not only is he into this excessive physicalness, but he also is losing contact. He's losing his control over inappropriate physical gratification, but he's also losing the ability to understand spiritually intellectual material because he's not into that zone. So the way you gravitate, that's what you understand. You can't be a physical, lustful person and at the same time be spiritual and into inspirational stuff. It just doesn't work that way. It cannot be that way. Yeah?
But if you're talking about someone eating an orange like the way you described it before, isn't that a spiritual? That's
spiritual. That is spiritual.
So can't
but we're talking about a person who has to have the designer labels. A person has to have the designer labels and has to overeat and all that stuff. He is not going to find it easy to be turned on to spiritual things. Right? It's the opposite. The spiritual person will look at the physical world in a way that's the way Hashem wants him to look at it, and will not. Having an orange, I would not say, is excessive lust.
Okay, but take the designer labels. What if a person transform that into, like, I have to dress like a melech or something? In other words,
again, he's saying you're osek.
Gaiva into a ruchnius.
No. If the person is osek, osek means he's engaged in it. He's engrossed in it. He's involved in it. He's looking at other design labels. In fact, he's paying more money because of the designer label. Right? It's got to feel so perfect. It's got to, right? That is a very lower level person. He's not going to get into spiritual things. They're not thinking that, I have to dress like a melech. They're not. It's a good excuse. They're not thinking that at all. They're not. Very few Hasidic Rebbes were able to do that. There were certain Hasidic Rebbes, they dressed royally because they were the Rebbe. They were the Rebbe, and the Hasidim had to respect the Rebbe and understand the Kiddush the Rebbe has, and the Hasidim will only understand it. But any regular person, if you're into it, you're into it. If you're into that, you're not into other things. You're not going to appreciate going through a whole Gemara and then you hear at the end, Lahagdil Torah v'Yadir. We were learning Gemara a couple days ago. And the Mishnah seems to say this, that's very logical, very makes sense. And that, 6 pages into the Gemara, it says, nah, that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about, even if it doesn't pertain to any halachic aspects, but you should know there are certain distinctions in certain things, although it doesn't make any difference in terms of Jewish law. So what are you writing it for? You get turned off from that kind of stuff. What's the big deal? Just let me have my pleasure that I want. Just think that's not going to happen. Okay, we'll have to stop at this point, and we'll have to see when we're going to resume with this.